Welcome to your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors. And on today's show, we have a very special guest. Howard Beck of Sports Illustrated, the senior NBA writer over there, is on today's show. He recently wrote a wonderful profile of Fred VanVleet in the lead up to his naming to the All-Star team. He, of course, since been named to the All-Star team. And we're going to talk to Howard about the rise for Fred VanVleet. What has gotten him to this point? How is he wired? Why is he wired this way? We also are going to dig into the relationship with Kyle Lowry between him and Fred. And, of course, the deadline is tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit about the scuttlebutt around the league. And what does the league think about the way the Raptors are going about building their team? All of that and more today with Howard Beck from Sports Illustrated. Stick around.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1114 of Locked On Raptors for Wednesday, February the 9th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at Woodley Sean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors, where you can find links to every single episode of the podcast. And you can go and subscribe to the show for free on all your favorite podcast platforms as well. We are also on YouTube, nearing 1,600 subs over there. Go join the party. Go hit that big red subscribe button. It's very much appreciated. And as always, a big thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, which is daily fantasy made easy. Go and check out Prize Picks today and use the code NBA for their wonderful single point bonus. I'll tell you more a little bit about that later on. Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. All right, on today's show, we are joined by a wonderful guest, Howard Beck of Sports Illustrated is going to be here in just a minute or two. We're going to dig into his recent profile of Fred VanVleet. It is linked in the description. If you have not read it yet, pause the show, read the piece, come back to the show, and listen to my chat with Howard. We're going to talk about Fred VanVleet's rise from undrafted to all-star and dig into just why does this guy just keep on getting better? How does he do it? Plus, the Raptors ahead of the deadline. Obviously, lots of stuff flying around, Goran Dragic rumors, etc. We'll get the latest from Howard on what he's hearing around the league. And also, I just kind of want to dig into Howard's view of the Raptors and the way they're building this very unorthodox team. That is all coming up on today's show. Really hope you enjoyed. It was awesome of Howard to come and hang out during trade deadline week. And so let's get to it. My conversation with Howard Beck of Sports Illustrated about Fred VanVleet and his rise to becoming an NBA All-Star. All right, joining me now on Locked On Raptors is a very special guest, the author of a wonderful recent profile on Fred VanVleet over at Sports Illustrated. Go and check it out. Pause the podcast right now if you haven't read it and do your homework. It is Howard Beck. Howard, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Good morning, Sean. Thank you. And I don't know how I feel about you assigning homework to your listeners before they hear me, but I would appreciate it if they went and read the story too. That's cool. Folks, you can do it after the pod also. I don't think there'll be a spoiler alerts problem. So however you want to do that.
We've got the kind substitute teacher coming in here telling the kids, don't worry, it's fine. No,
do whatever you want. Yeah.
If you do want to stop and read the piece before continuing on, it is linked down in the description, both on the podcast and YouTube versions of the show. Howard, really, really happy to have you on. And Fred VanVleet is such an interesting guy. And I mean, we are spoiled here in Toronto because we get to interact with him every day and get to sort of be front and center for his rise to what he's become and how thoughtful of a quote he is and all of that. For you, I mean, there are a lot of guys in the NBA who you could profile ahead of the All-Star, lots of interesting stories. For you, like, what compelled you to really dig in on Fred and his rise to this point?
Because, as you guys well know, I mean, there is no story quite like Fred's, right? Yeah. It's been 16 years or something since there's been an undrafted player to make the All-Star team. And when I started working on the story, the idea was, it's not a certainty that he's making the All-Star team. He is absolutely going to be in the mix for the reserves when the coaches start picking. But there's a lot of guards who are worthy, and Fred's profile is just lower than a lot of other guys. The Raptors, lack of success the last couple of years has something to do with that. Fred's own style of play and overall profile as an NBA player has something to do with that. But that's what makes him so compelling. Like, yes, he's a phenomenal interview. He's a great quote, incredibly thoughtful, great communicator, engaging. But it's his basketball story that makes it intriguing in the first place. That to me, if I'm going to write a kind of a quicker term profile, this wasn't a deep dive. I wasn't going into his childhood and talking to family and all that stuff. But if I'm going to do a profile of somebody who is having that kind of breakthrough year and who is part of the discussion for the All-Star game, I want to write about the guy who's the most unlikely name in the entire conversation. That's just, the kind of story that appeals to me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Reading the piece, you got DeMar in there, you got Norm Powell in there, you got a lot of people who've kind of been in Fred's orbit. And, I'm always kind of fascinated. Like, you can talk to Fred and kind of get a really good feeling for who Fred is, right? And, how he views himself. He's not afraid to say what he thinks of himself, which is one of the things we love about Fred. But when you talk to other people about him, I'm curious, like, what the sort of impression you get is. What is the vibe from people who talk about Fred? Do they speak about him with like reverence? Is it like just like an awe or like a stunned like surprise that this guy who is lying about being 6'1" is this successful and advanced in his NBA career? Like, what's the impression you get from those who you talk to about him, as they kind of regale you with tales?
I think DeMar called him 5'8", didn't he?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I really wanted Kyle Lowry for this story, and had hoped to get him, and I'm sure he would have been happy to speak if context were different. But as you know, Kyle spent a couple weeks away from the team in Miami because of some personal stuff going on, and so my timing just kind of sucked in that regard, which was too bad because I know Kyle a little bit, and I know Kyle's relationship with Fred is one that I'm sure he would have loved to have talked a little bit about. Whether it was DeRozan or Norm Powell or Nick Nurse or a couple other people I talked to who I didn't quote, but who I just kind of chatted with on background, it's consistent across the board. Everybody, it's, you use the word reverence, like it's almost a little too strong, but there's an admiration, like this, like strong admiration for what Fred has built himself into. And, in NBA circles among players, I think, they're not blown away by anybody, right? Like, they've seen it all. Like, they play against LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry every night. Like, there's nothing, about another athlete's talent that is going to make them go, wow, look at that. Their whole existence is based on taking all of the awe and all of the human response that you and I would have as normal human beings out of the equation. Because if you walk into the gym with reverence for anybody, you're going to get your ass kicked. So you dispense with that very quickly in this league, especially guys who have played a long time or played at a high level. So it's not that. It's more that, especially for, Norm, who was 1 year into the league when Fred arrived. I was going to say when Fred was drafted, when Fred was not drafted, when Fred was signed. And DeMar, who was, obviously a few years older than that. It's more that they recognize some things immediately in Fred. Confidence, for sure. The work ethic, absolutely. The his ability just to be outspoken and have a certain, like, speak with an air of authority even when he was not an authority, right? Like,
right.
In this league, you tend to think of leaders as being either the stars on their team who leadership is conferred on them by sheer the effects of them being the best player, right? And not every star is actually a good leader, because just being the best player does not necessarily make you the best leader. But that's usually and then the other category of go-to leader, voice in the locker room, guy who's going to, like, try to, keep people on task, call guys out, point out when you're falling short. That's going to be like, the 10-year vet, the guy who maybe won a championship somewhere else and is now your 7th or 8th guy or whatever. Fred, as a player who was undrafted and young and not a star and did not, have an apparent star trajectory, for him to be, I think, as bold as he was from the beginning, being willing just to speak out and say things to guys, I think just made an impression on everybody. But also, the bottom line is this: it's the work, right? This is a guy who knows where he wants to get, has an absolute confidence to him, and when I ask these guys, are you surprised at where he is? It's both things, yes and no. It is not surprised because they know what Fred's about and what he could build himself into. But yes, surprised because nobody thinks of the undrafted guy coming in, undersized on day one as a future All-Star. But nobody thought that about Kyle Lowry either. And certainly not in his first however many stops before Toronto, and even when he arrived in Toronto. So, that's what makes it so much fun, is that it's rare to see the guy who just simply by sheer force of will built himself into an All-Star. And they all do to an extent, but some guys arrive in this league with more athletic gifts than others. And, Fred arrived with very few that people could readily identify. And that's not a knock. That is to his credit. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like the fact that he's been calling his shot the whole way too, like with the bet on yourself stuff, is just like, you got to only tip your cap and sort of bow down to that, right? It's
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think I mentioned some version of this in the story from, playing off of one of his quotes. Fred has this amazing ability to speak with a swagger and a self-confidence and borderline arrogance. If you just saw the words in print, you might actually think, wow, this guy, who does he think he is? Like how he thinks he was going to be an all-star, and given his profile, how? But that's on paper. Like when you hear him speak, it's not coming off as arrogance at all. It's not coming off as this kind of, it's not even coming off as swagger. It's just coming off as like a really strong, it's just a strong self-confidence. And that's the charm, part of the charm of Fred VanVleet. He knows exactly what he's capable of. He knows, what the perceived limitations are. He has obviously grander goals for himself, but not in a way that ever makes you think he's either crazy or delusional or arrogant. And by the way, I've seen players who are all those things. We've seen guys in this league, like the couple come to mind right off the bat, who have, like this just stupid audaciousness, right? Where the guys who are taking shots they should not be taking, guys who are taking more shots than they should be taking, guys who have a self-image that goes way beyond what their actual value is. And that's not Fred. His soaring self-confidence is just born more of his understanding of himself, his understanding both of his limitations and his potential, and knowing how much he puts into this.
All right, we got more with Howard Beck coming up in just 1 second here. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. NBA fans, are you looking for daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to try the award-winning app, and that is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love it. I know you're going to love it too. It's easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. Use the award-winning app on both App Store and Google Play today, and you get options with Prize Picks. You can pick props on anything from points scored to rebounds to steals, and you can even do mixed sport entries. So maybe you're a football head and a basketball person, and you want to have a mixed sports Super Bowl and Sunday afternoon NBA game action. You can go ahead and do that. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer offer for all of our users. Get 50% for $50, that is, for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. But you got to use that code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans only. Sign up today and use the code NBA for $50 free if a player in your Prize Picks entry scores a single point. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Go check them out. You've got hoopers and basketball players. You've got Fred VanVleet's and Jordan Crawford's. It's basically how you can divide up the entire NBA.
That's a good one. I thought of somebody else who was in that same category, but I'll leave him nameless. You can probably extrapolate.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm glad you brought up Kyle Lowry. So the Raptors have had this like golden age of point guard play that is seemingly going to continue on. And so Fred VanVleet's no longer on the Raptors, and he's obviously up for a new deal after next season. I totally imagine they're going to max him out and extend him and make him, the new Kyle Lowry, and, line up the statue next to wherever Kyle's ends up outside of the big bank. I'm curious, just sort of from your impression from, talking to people about just sort of how the Raptors do things. It's just is it because the Raptors have this sort of culture that they've been able to, you get Kyle Lowry and you kind of work him into this, this sort of leader and sort of, the guy he's become. And then, he kind of disseminates the wisdom to Fred VanVleet, and it kind of just like, I think there is this sort of, compulsion to say, oh, well, the Raptors culture, this is the reason why. I kind of go on the other side and think it's more kind of just dumb luck that it's happened this way with especially these guys. I mean, you can look at the player development for guys like Siakam and OG and the sort of, the long limmy dudes they tend to draft. And that's a different sort of conversation. But when it comes to like the culture side of things, do you think it's like because of the Raptors that they've had this point guard golden age, or do you think it's more they ended up with two specifically wired guys who were always going to become like this? Like, or is it a little bit of both? Like, it's a really fascinating thing that the Raptors have kind of happened into here, and I don't really know where to assign the credit, or even if there is credit to assign. Maybe it's just random chance that you got these two guys who just happen to be wired this way.
It's a great question, and not one that I specifically put to anybody there, but one that next time I get a chance, I might, even if it's just idle conversation on the sideline one night before a game, because I am curious about that as well. I think, listen, when we talk about culture with regard to teams, and of course it's an overused word, but it is important, right? It can become cliche, but still actually be important. It is important. When the Spurs draft Tim Duncan back in the day, and then for the next 20 years, we talk about Spurs culture, and we talk about what the Spurs are about, and what their values are, and what a pop kind of team looks like, what a Spurs team looks like. All of that is an outgrowth to an extent of what Tim Duncan was about. And, even before that, what David Robinson was about. And those guys were probably about a lot of the same things, even though they were very different in a lot of ways. And so, your best player sets the culture. The coach can set the culture. The team president or GM can try to set the culture. The owner sets the culture to an extent too, for that matter, even though they're in most places far removed from the locker room. How you run your franchise and the values that you espouse, and whether you're consistent in what your goals are and consistent in the kinds of people you want to hire. All of that trickles down through the front office and eventually into basketball ops and to the roster. So that said, let's never forget, and this is not a knock, Masai wanted to trade Kyle Lowry when he first got there. And very fortunate that he failed to. And Masai would be the first, I think, to tell you that, just as Pop would be the first to tell you that he was lucky enough to get Tim Duncan, and that made everything else that much easier. So then when we talk about, like, is Kyle Lowry now the Tim Duncan of Raptors culture? Maybe. He's certainly a big piece of that. And I think that, especially because Kyle had the background that he did, he's not coming in as some entitled superstar who, like, I'm here to save your franchise. No, he built himself into this Kyle Lowry. And because of that, the things that he was about that allowed him to flourish and become an all-star when nobody could see that coming, I think sets the tone for everybody else to come. Now, the Raptors, as you noted along the way, they have a great player development program that has been an emphasis there, I think, throughout Masai's tenure. That is to the credit of the franchise. Again, that's part of team culture too. What do you emphasize? What do you invest in? And so to their success now, and just this collection of players that maybe nobody else would have looked at and said, well, this could be the core of a new, I don't know if we want to call them contender, strong playoff team, wherever this is headed. I don't know where this is headed. But I think that some teams will tell you, and Memphis is this way too. They're like, when Memphis gets Desmond Bane and Dylan Brooks, they're like, oh, look at all these amazing overachievers they got. That's not completely by accident. Yeah. They were picking guys who fit a certain profile in terms of character and work ethic and self-awareness and all this. I like, they profile these guys on more than just basketball. Yeah. And I think that when the Raptors end up with a bunch of really good guys who work hard, and by the way, are also really long, and like you can tell after a while, oh, there's a system here, or there's an approach here, and it may not be perfect across the board, and they might misfire here and there, and not everybody they draft is going to fit this exact profile, but they're looking for a certain type, and you can see it. Like, there's a through line through this young core of that the Raptors have, and so yeah, there's always some good luck too, because there might be a guy you like who think is perfect for your team and is exactly what the Raptors are supposed to be about, and that guy might get drafted the slot before you pick, right? But listen, as you know, there was that big debate about who to take on draft night even last year, Suggs or Barnes, and people were shocked when they took Scotty Barnes, and I think everybody's feeling right now that once again the Raptors made the right call.
Yeah, it's going all right over here with Scotty Barnes in town. We'll get to some deadline stuff here. I do want to have one last thing here on Fred, and it's tied to Lowry again. There was, I think, this sort of sentiment from the team coming into this season that, as much as they loved everything about Kyle, and Kyle was the sort of, father figure of the team almost, like it seemed like they were kind of ready, like Fred, Pascal, OG, we're a little bit ready to just kind of like have the team be theirs. And I think that's part of the calculus of why the Raptors ended up moving on, et cetera. I'm not sure if you asked this of Fred. I would be curious, what he thinks. Like, he gets compared to Kyle all the time. It's easy, right? Diminutive point guard, like wonderful advanced stats, metrics, all this stuff. Great 3-point shooter. Yeah. Like overachiever, all of that. Does he like that comp? Like, does he get bothered by it because it's still this sort of specter of Kyle hanging over the team? I'm guilty of it. I do it all the time on this very show, where it's impossible not to, considering the similarities. Like, is that something he gets bothered by, do you think? You might not have even asked him about this, but like that's a fascinating thing to me, to have this sort of guy who you're constantly being compared to, and now you're sort of matching in many ways what he did. Obviously not over the same length of time and level of success just yet, but like, that's got to be an interesting thing for a guy to constantly being compared to like the greatest player in franchise history. But maybe Fred's wired to not really care about that.
It's impossible. You said it. It's impossible not to make the comparison. It just is. I mean, when I was talking to Nick Nurse, he brought it up at least a couple times unprompted, right? Like, it's impossible not to make the comparison, just as it was impossible not to compare, Kobe to Michael Jordan, a little bit different level of that. But sometimes the similarity is so striking that you cannot avoid it. And it feels cliche, and you almost say it sheepishly, right? Fred did not express any sense of like there was no eye roll. There was no, physical or verbal kind of cringe or whatever to Kyle's invoking Kyle's name. So I think that's a good sign. Maybe eventually he'll get tired of that and say, guys, find a new angle. We sometimes do beat some stuff to death here in the media. It's been known to happen. So I think at this point,
how about them Lakers, Howard? What's going on with the Lakers?
Good Lord. If we don't have to talk about them again for the rest of the year, it would be nice. So, because Fred is so tight with Kyle and admires him so much and obviously learned so much from him, I don't think there can be any negative there, right? And so, no, he didn't express any of that. And I was asking him a little bit about so the things that you learned coming up under Kyle, that you learned from DeMar, that you learned from, Kawhi for that matter, Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, these guys are your vets. These are the guys who kind of brought you up. He mentioned some things about all of them that I think were important, and his gratitude for having that environment, for having all those guys, all really great players and high character guys. So very fortunate for him, because not everybody who comes into the league has that advantage. And that's something else I should just mention as a quick aside. If Fred VanVleet is signed by some other team still undrafted, again, we don't have to name them. I don't need to take shots right now, but
it's been a hard enough week for some of the teams I feel like you're maybe sort of referencing, but we
yes, very intuitive of you there, Sean. If he had landed in some of those places, he's not the same Fred VanVleet today, perhaps. He would have worked just as hard. He would have been the same high character guy. He would have been all about the right things still. But if he's with a team that is totally dysfunctional and doesn't invest in player development, maybe even doesn't have a G League team, as the case for Portland. I think they're the lone holdout. A team that doesn't have the kind of veterans who can teach you something. Like, everybody's got some veterans around, but there's different quality of veterans in terms of their ability to impart some knowledge and some lessons and everything else. If you land in an organization with no accountability, anyway, all those things factor into. But where it comes to, the Kyle Lowry thing, like I said, I think Fred is very comfortable with that at this stage still, and understands I think he understands it's unavoidable. Also, there was one other thought I had about the Kyle thing I was going to try to tell you, but I've lost that thread. So we'll keep going. If it comes back to me, I'll jump back in.
Yeah, no sweat. So awesome stuff on Fred. Everyone go read the piece. We're going to flip our attention over to the trade deadline now, though. So we're, I guess, as we record this, 29 hours away from the deadline.
Quick, before I forget it again,
yes.
on Kyle. Fred did go out of his way to say, he made an emphasis of this point, and I think it's in the story, that if Kyle doesn't leave, he doesn't have this opportunity to grow in this same way.
Right.
And that you can apply that to the other young guys too. Like, to an extent, as important as Kyle and a bunch of these other guys were to that championship run, that team, slowly eroded over a couple of years, but you do have to eventually kind of clear the decks for the young guys to take ownership. And for Fred, he was ready for this, right? So it's a mixed bag for him, watching Kyle leave and as a friend being sad to see him go, but at the same time knowing professionally this was the best thing for him. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
Siakam's not averaging 5+ assists or 7 assists, whatever he's been averaging over the last 7 weeks a game with Lowry on the team either, right? So it all kind of and we're going to round out the conversation with Howard Beck in just 1 second here. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, who make the best tasting protein bars in the world, bar none. You gotta check them out. And they don't just have regular protein bars that you're looking at. They have wonderful creative confections like the Built Bar Puffs. They are marshmallowy, they are fluffy, they are delicious, and they're not just a protein bar. They are a treat covered in 100% chocolate and loaded with protein you would never even know. They are a fan favorite. They got some amazing flavors, including cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're so good, and these are going to be your new favorite in addition to your regular cast of Built Bars. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to the regular candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. It's just no good. You don't want to be doing that. So go and get yourself some Built Bars today. Pick a flavor you want, get some puffs on the side, and go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That is the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. And now, let's get back to the conversation with Howard Beck of Sports Illustrated to round out the show. So, deadline. The deadline is 29 hours away. I've done the math. I've figured it out. The Raptors are floating around this Goran Dragic plus 2 seconds plus a first, per all the reporting, as a potential package to bring in some sort of, I'm assuming, bench help for a team that has a 7.5-man rotation right now. This is a really interesting time. And I think the Cavs are an interesting comparison point because they're a team, even more impressive in a lot of ways this season with maybe less on the roster considering the injuries that the Raptors have. And they, despite being a super young team that has its best days clearly ahead of it, they go and get Karis LeVert and give up a lot for him, 2 pretty good picks in order to help bolster their chances this season in a weird Eastern Conference where the Nets are falling apart and, it's not exactly clear, what kind of path through the playoffs might be there for some team, maybe replicating what the Hawks did last year, for example. The Raptors seem to be in kind of a similar spot, maybe a little bit ahead in terms of development because they have Fred and Pascal and OG who are on their veteran deals. And, there's a ticking clock before those are up, et cetera. What do you think should be the calculus here for the Raptors in terms of like trading off future assets and picks in exchange for, marginal upgrades to a team that has been really good, but feels like it's maybe not super sustainable playing a playoff length rotation, like a Mike D'Antoni length playoff rotation in regular season games against the Hornets? Like, where do you think the sort of urgency should be here for the Raptors to accelerate things a little bit, considering how far ahead of schedule Scotty Barnes is and the growth made by their core guys this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a tough one to answer. I mean, I actually thought, as of like a week ago, I was starting to bounce around this question in my own head and a little bit with people I talked to about the Cavs and the Grizzlies, right? Two teams that made these huge leaps this season that we did not see coming, that they themselves did not see coming. And, you immediately start to think about, well, does this make them buyers? Does this mean you're all in right now? Should you accelerate the process, knowing you've got this young group? Do you just let them kind of grow together a little and evaluate a little bit more? Wait till the off season to decide what the next big move should be? The Cavs had their hand forced in a way because they make this big leap, but they lost Sexton early on. They lose Ricky Rubio along the way, and suddenly they just didn't have any other playmakers or anybody could handle the ball at all. And not that Karis LeVert is a point guard, but he's, a swingman who can do a lot with the ball in his hands. And I saw him here in Brooklyn early in his career where, he could play kind of a pseudo, point forward, point guard, point whatever, run the second unit a little bit, ball stump sometimes sticks a little bit when he does that. But he's a guy who can, put up some numbers and points, assists, and rebounds and keep things humming. Right. So Rubio's out. He's an expiring anyway. They attach some picks that have some value, but given where they are now in the standings, not a ton. And it wasn't so much an all-in move like, okay, this puts us in the championship mix or to win the East. It was, I think, more to stabilizing. Realizing that they're at a moment here, and they might as well just use Rubio's contract. You could make the same case for the Raptors, I guess, with Dragic's contract and say, well, might as well use that, and they probably will. But it's a bigger number and a harder one to move. And, I don't think they would have been the ones in the running for LeVert. I don't think he fits their group. They've got plenty of that type of guy and probably better versions. So I don't think there was urgency for the Cavs. I think there was an opportunity. And the urgency was that they just needed somebody else who could handle the ball. Raptors are in a different spot. The Raptors last year was an outlier. It shouldn't have happened. There was such a combination of factors. They were never as bad as their record suggested. It was all the circumstances, I think, that contributed to that. And now they're back either where they should have been, or maybe they're a little ahead of the game. And I think they are in that position of, hey, everything is gravy right now for this season. Let it evolve. Let it take its course. Siakam just got healthy again, and he's looking like, the Siakam that we thought would be this core piece. And Fred's now an all-star. I think you can just let this one ride a little bit. They don't have to do anything. Whatever they turn Dragic into in the next however many hours you said it was, will be a nice addition to help stabilize them. But obviously it's not going to be some piece that puts them over the top.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that they're going to go and, do multiple firsts or anything like that for some kind of, pseudo core piece. I don't think they're getting someone like they got Gary Trent last year, right? Who you figure, oh, this guy can be part of our plans for sure going forward. I think probably it's, you get someone. I would imagine it's just like they've got the offers on the table. Like it's Dragic in a first, Dragic in 2 seconds, and then just whoever the best guy is at 3:00, they probably pull the trigger, I would assume. But we shall see. Howard, I don't want to keep you too much longer here, but I just have one more for you, just about the Raptors experiment. It's a weird team, super bizarre to watch every single night. I'm having a blast because it's just unlike anything I've ever watched before. You get these maniacs flying around all day, every day, and it seems like they're going to hurt themselves at every instant. But it's just so compelling. Around the league, are people looking at the Raptors like, what the hell are those freaks doing? This is not going to work. Why don't they have centers? Why don't they have more than one guard? What's going on? Or is there a little intrigue this is coming for us and we're not really prepared, as I think we've seen a few teams recently with more traditional roster building constructions. They're just what the hell do we do with these guys? What's the view around the league on what the Raptors are doing, if you have collected any intel on that?
Yeah, not really. I haven't had that kind of conversation with anybody, but again, a good one, a good place to start to ask folks. I think there's very little around the league anymore that I think that would take people aback as to what the heck are they doing? The Cavs had that a little bit with the what the heck are they doing with this jumbo front court in an era of small ball. And so that became this kind of funky outlier and a lot of skepticism about whether it would work until suddenly they're just kicking people's butts defensively and becoming a real team again. With the Raptors, I think it's because of the Raptors' trajectory in recent history, right? A finals team in 2019 that lost the finals MVP, that then peeled off veterans one by one over the next couple of off seasons, that went through their own unique hell during the pandemic because they had to be relocated for an entire season, hundreds of miles, 1,000 miles, whatever it is, from home. I don't think anybody was viewing it. I think people have had a hard time getting a gauge on what the Raptors were going to be, right? Once they started to fall off. I do think everybody expected them to bounce back. That is one conversation I did have in the offseason for sure. Right. Nobody thought the Raptors were as bad as their record last year. Everybody expected a bounce back of some sort this year. It was just a matter of how long it would take and to what extent. So I think it's probably more intrigue than anything else.
Makes sense. Howard, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. Like during trade deadline week, thanks for stooping to this level when you clearly got more important things to do. But it's been awesome to chat with you, and a really wonderful piece on Fred. Everyone should go read it. Anything else the good people out there should go check out from you, whether it's deadline stuff, podcasts, anything else that people should be checking out?
I mean, go to SI.com for all of our latest coverage, of course, me and my colleagues, Chris Mannix, Chris Herring, Rowan Nutkarni, Michael Pina, and we will be having some sort of massive post-trade deadline podcast on the Crossover and Open Floor. It's a Open Floor crossover pod. Thursday afternoon after the trade deadline, so keep an eye out for that as well.
I got to say, the crew that you've assembled over at SI is incredible. I soak up as much as of your content as I can, except for that dastardly Pina. He can get out of here. But anyway.
Dastardly is a good word for him. That's the guy gave himself his own nickname, Michael the Pod Pina. Who does that?
Yeah,
he's going around
Black
just like
peddling Jaylen Brown propaganda all the time. What a ridiculous person. Anyway, we're going to wrap it there. Howard, thank you so much. For the listener out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with 2 episodes, a recap episode of tonight's game against the Thunder in the morning, and then an afternoon bonus show with Yasmin Dawala from Yahoo Sports. We're going to talk about the deadline just as the deadline passes at 3 in the afternoon. And thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen of the day, Locked On Bets, to get all you need to know ahead of the Super Bowl this weekend and win some money. And with that, we will talk to you again tomorrow with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye.